There you go.
There she is.
Excellent. All right. Take it away, Lindsay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, ladies, here we are. How are you all? Hope you're having a good conference.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's start with introductions. Your name, your company, what your company does, and where you're at in your current fundraising track.
Hi, everyone. I'm Melanie Ling. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Form Alloy. We design and manufacture directed energy deposition systems. So that way you can make metal components, typically large, like the rocket nozzle type things that you see behind me here. And we have been in business since 2016. So we have been through early funding, government funding, and a Series A with a strategic investor. And we are in the process of a Series B right now, and very much look forward to sharing whatever I can to help other entrepreneurs.
My turn. Okay, I'm Lee, or Libat Nelson. And now I'm a consultant, a kind of a business mentor. But in my past, I was both a venture capitalist and later an entrepreneur. Our startup did security for additive manufacturing through software.
Great. And hopefully you can hear me. My name is Cora Liebig. I'm the founder and CEO of Chromatic 3D Materials. We started in 2016. We're based in Minneapolis and Germany. And our focus is to make printing systems for high durability cross-linked plastics or thermosets like this part here. It's a flexible material, very highly durable. So we've entered the market with a polyurethane elastomer and also sell printers and made for reactive pathing software. And to date, we've raised $10 million in grants and venture capital, and we're characterized as early revenue and currently raising funds to accelerate our commercialization.
Wow. So when we talk about fundraising, let's just start at the beginning. And what are the basics? What are the fundamentals? What are the different types of fundraising available?
Yeah, I can jump in and start this, Lindsay. There's a few different ways I think about fundraising and who you want your investors to be. And I ultimately think it's based on where you're at in your company, how early you are in your journey, and then how much you want to raise. Sometimes that'll kind of help determine which path you want to go down. There is non-dilutive funding options, which would be things like government funding, like the SBIR and STTR programs. And then there's other types of dilutive funding where you can bring on an investor. You're basically giving them a certain stake in your company, and in return, they give you cash to invest in the business. And then those can be grouped into different types of grouping. And I think of them as strategic, which would be someone who is just as interested in the technology as they are the financial potential. There's more of a traditional, like a VC type of investor, and their role is, although they sometimes have an interest in the technology, they have usually a more vested interest in the financial returns, for their shareholders. And then there are, individual investors. So you can do like angel investors. You might group together a group of angel investors, or even like friends and family. And so those are kind of high level, how I think of it. And they all have their different benefits and challenges. And I'll leave it at that, so everyone has a chance to speak here.
Lee, did you want to add to any of the different sources or any of the basics of VC fund?
I think an overarching thing is to think about who would be the best partner for you, not just the stage of the company. Also look at the investor and see what they've done, because not all investors, even in the same category, they're not all the same, and a lot of them don't do manufacturing or don't do AM, or they're not. It's very hard to be the first investment in a category for an investor. It's possible, obviously somebody was first for everybody, but it's much harder than being, if they did something adjacent or something similar, especially if they've had a success. And so I always look at it both as an entrepreneur and as an investor as a long-term relationship. And you have to have a match on both sides. It's not just, investors don't think that they're just giving money. They like to think that they have some kind of added value, as Melanie said, on the business side, on the financial side, but also sometimes even on the technology and connecting you with people that can help you. And so the relationship is important. I would not advise just getting money from somebody that's completely, doesn't know anything about the area, because there will be problems down the road when they start to ask questions and they don't understand the answers. And it takes a lot of effort on the startup side, and it sometimes sours, and that's the worst thing that could happen.
Mm.
So, I mean, if you want to, I can explain a little bit how VCs think, but maybe we could do that down the line.
Sure. Well, I wanted to ask, what are some, if you could identify some of the various sources of funding, where do you go? How do you get started?
I guess I'd love to dive in here. I mean, the obvious source of funding is revenue. So and revenue pays twice. So any revenue you get increases your ability to get financing. So I think that's the most important thing for any entrepreneur to be thinking about is revenue and how to get it and the pathway to get it. I think some of the other sources of revenue, sources of financing are grants. Grants are great. But I think there's a skill involved with grants in projecting sort of 6 months forward to where the company will be. So the important thing about a grant is that you don't get the money immediately. It's usually 6 months from the time that you file an application till you hear whether or not you're going to get it. And so from a technology perspective, you need to think forward. Where will we be in 6 months and what will we need to do? And I think the other piece of advice that's really important is that you should not apply for grants that take you off your path to revenue. So it's, I got some great advice about, for example, DoD grants, that you really only want to do as much of your defense contracts that you really need for your commercial activities. And from there, you want the Defense Department to be paying for, things that they would actually use. But you really need to make sure your grants don't distract you, because that's very tempting. Some of the other sources of revenue, and I think one of the first places to look is your own pocketbook and friends and family. I had consulted for some people who were starting a company, and they weren't willing to themselves take their own time or invest their own funds. And that really raises a lot of questions for anyone. If you think about it, if you go and ask anyone else for money, their first question is, well, what are you doing? And why should I invest in you if you're not investing in yourself? And that investing in yourself can be your own reason, but also friends and family. So the important thing about friends and family sources of revenue is that it's really a vote of confidence in what you can do. And so some of your friends and family investors, they don't have to be your, Aunt Joe who inherited a lot of wealth. It could be from a former company that you may have worked with, or a professor that you may have worked with, where they have some private wealth that they're able to invest in you. And that's also an important source of financing and backing. Angel funds are also a good place to go. The tricky thing with angel funds is that each individual is different. You can't kind of group them all together. Some angel investors have a very short timeline where they want to return on their money. Others are more looking for the journey, want to make a contribution and pay back. And so it's really important with your angel investors to know where they're coming from and what their objectives are with the investment. And finally, I think the other thing that's important with angels is that they're able to connect you to VCs. So the other thing to understand
Right.
about the structure of VCs, sorry, am I breaking up?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. The other important thing to know about the structure of VCs is that they definitely farm. So there are small seed fund VCs that farm from angel funds, larger VCs farm from smaller VCs, where they're kind of using that hierarchy to vet companies and get an assessment of the companies. And it's a way that a large VC can understand where some of the exciting work is coming from. So it's important to look in your local markets for your angel investors. If you go out of your local market, usually angel investors from other regions will question, why are you here? Does that mean you didn't succeed in your local market?
So there is a progression, do you think, that VCs want to see from a company?
That depends on the VC. I think that some of them, they want you to go to tier 1 immediately. And so even angels are tiered. And the way you can see that is from their portfolio and from the companies in their portfolios, which VCs invested in those companies. The best recommendation you can get is from an angel that already had a successful co-investment with a VC. And if that angel invested, by the way, if the angel doesn't invest and they suggest to introduce you, that's not a good introduction. Because the first question they're going to get is, why didn't you invest? And no matter what they say, they won't, the VC will not believe it and will just assume that there's something wrong with this company. So, a lot of people are very well-meaning and they say, I can't invest, but I can introduce you. That's very nice of them. But I normally, unless there's something very, very specific, like, for example, they only invest in software and you're a hardware company. But unless it's something very, very clear, and simple like that, there's really no way to answer that question well, no matter how well they know them. So, I think that this farming happens for some funds, but the really sought after funds, they don't need to farm. Everybody comes to them. And so they self-select. I think two things that Cora said that are very important. One is vetting, that actually the reference is a vetting process. And you don't want to cold call an investor, because that basically means to them you don't know anybody that they know. And so, or you didn't try, which is even worse. So that's one thing. And the other thing is really this thing of, think about what are their goals, and are they short-term, long-term. You also need to look at what their usual bite size is, like how much do they usually invest, because if they usually invest $100,000 and you want $1 million, they're probably not going to do it. And vice versa, by the way, as well. So you really need to have a fit. And the other tip that I would give here is to look at the life of, if you go for a fund, look how old the fund is, because the older the fund is, the shorter the time span to exit that they expect, because at some point the fund ends. So you want to get to a fund early that they just raised, so to speak, or in the angel case that they just decided to collaborate, and not something that's been going on for a long time with the same people and they're already looking for exits. They may make more investments, but they'll be less patient on average.
I think one of the things I'm hearing in common is that networking is really important, and building a network within whatever industry you're in or you're trying to penetrate. And I think there's a couple ways that can be done when you're first getting started. One is to look for relevant shows and conferences and events in your industry and start showing up and introducing yourself and meeting people and talking about what you do. And that's sometimes a good way to then get introductions. I know the strategic that we ended up with for our Series A was someone that we met at one of the very first conferences that we attended. Of course, it took them a couple of years. We worked with them a couple of years before we closed our Series A with them, but that's how we initially met and started working together. And the second thing I would say is, to your point about starting local if you're looking for angel investors, many cities have different accelerators that you can join. Some are, non-dilutive, so they are basically funded by, the community or grants to help your business get started, and others will require, some type of, exchange of ownership or, future promise or something. So definitely look if you're, very new getting started, see what accelerators are available either locally or if there's something virtual, and start showing up at events. And both of those things will allow you to start building that network and then getting some of those meaningful introductions. And then the other thing I would say is I do think that strategic investors can be outstanding, especially for a high tech company, because oftentimes, like our company is primarily a hardware company that requires a large investment. It's a pretty special investor who wants to invest in a hardware specific entity, just because the investments are typically high. And, with software, sometimes you can convert more quickly. So for us, at least for a Series A, it was very important and ended up partnering with a strategic for that reason, because they understood what we were doing and they weren't afraid of a hardware startup, and they saw so much value in the technology in their own product. So if you can go the strategic route, I've had an outstanding experience with a strategic investor, and I wouldn't discount that if it's a good fit for what you're doing.
The thing to watch out for with strategics is sometimes they put in clauses in your investment that can make it difficult for you to sell to anybody else. And that's really where you need to just watch out from a red flag perspective. You should have yourself a good kind of financing attorney who can help you navigate the term sheets and things like that. But that's the one thing to watch out for a strategic investor is
Right. When they say lean and mean, they don't mean about the lawyer, because that really pays off in the end. There are so many pitfalls beyond just the obvious, right of first refusal and exclusivity and stuff like that. There are many, many very subtle pitfalls that can come. But I agree with Melanie that strategic investors could be very good, especially this year, which we'll talk about later. But I think they're investing much more on average than the financial investors right now.
Okay, so let's kind of dive into that. I mean, as we're talking about finding the right partner and the various kinds of VC funds that are available, how do you maintain a good working relationship with your vendor, with your investors, and how important is that? What are the signs that it's not going so well and it's time to pivot?
So I've seen this from both sides, and I can tell you my personal philosophy. My personal philosophy is that your investors must be your cherished partners, that you're excited to tell them all the good news as it happens, not just at the board meeting or once a year or once a quarter. And you also consult with them when there is a problem. So a very high level of transparency. You have to do it in a diplomatic way, because investors can also scare off if there's too much bad news. But if you do it diplomatically and more as advice than as, oh my God, what happened, to me, that is the cornerstone of the relationship. The other thing is to really get to know them and see where they can be most helpful. They always say that the best way to make a person connected to you is to have them do something for you. And so when they actually make connections and each one has their own forte, and some of them may have, really weird fortes, but they can come in handy. I can tell you that, the first brand we ever kind of discussed our startup with came through an angel investor, and it was something out of the blue that I would have had no way to access. And he just said, "Oh, I know this guy. Let me arrange." And initially you think, well, it's secret, it's whatever. But in the end, it was a very useful introduction. And he came with us to the meeting, and he really smoothed things over. And they gave us a lot of time and a lot of attention, a lot of feedback. And they ended up being a beta customer. So it's actually it can be very, very useful, but it requires an investment of time and effort. You know, I've met a lot of CEOs that say, I don't have time for my investors. I don't want them to, you know, I'm just selling, selling, selling. And I don't have time to like hold their hands or whatever it's deemed that way. If your CFO is good enough to do that, that's okay, or you're one of your co-founders. But somebody has to own this relationship and they need to be high up. You cannot let some, you know, the office manager do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the relationships are critical and putting, like you said, time and effort into building that. And I also think that's really important up front as you're going through the process. It's okay as an entrepreneur to say no to money if you don't think that it's the right fit, or let's say you get down and the terms and conditions they're just not worth accepting. You know, don't be afraid. I know it's hard to say no to money, but if it's not a good fit, you have to have the discipline to walk away. Similar to what Cora was saying about grants, that there might be funding available, but if it distracts you from your strategy and the plan you need to go, you know, it's not worth it because it'll cause more damage in the end. So I think the relationship is key. And many times, at least what I've been told, is that the investor is investing in the people, sometimes more so than the technology or the company or the financials. They're believing in the person, and they're believing in you, and you need to have that same level of confidence that they're going to be a good partner. And so I think it's worth investing in the relationship, asking for help when you need it, and really important to build that trust, because there's times, you know, with our investors too, and you know, with our board, if I say, trust me on this one, you know, we need to, you know, do this or that, they do. They fully trust me. And same to them. If they provide information or, you know, final decision on something that we've asked them to make, I have to also trust them. So it's, the relationship is everything.
I think, Melanie, kudos to you for having a relationship with them for a few years before they invested, because that's something that many people are impatient about. They go to a revenue stage VC when they just have a PowerPoint and they're disappointed that they didn't invest, and they say, oh, they wasted my time. It's not a waste of time. You need to nurture this relationship, and eventually it, you know, something comes out of it. The possibility of coming in, you know, with your cap in your hand and getting the money and getting out like super efficient like that, that hardly ever happens. That only happens in the movies. Well, maybe not only, but mostly.
And I think the sometimes the round, at least for us, it definitely morphed a little bit. So we had a path that we were going down, and we were planning on having a lead investor and a follow investor. And as you may know, if you've been down this path, there's certain investors and investor groups that only lead, and certain that only follow, and some that do both. So it can be, you know, complicated to sort of put all that together. But don't worry or be afraid if you start going down a path and you need to change it. So for example, we had a follow and a lead identified, and the follow came and said, you know what, we've seen a lot and we really believe in what you're doing now. And so we'd like to ask respectfully that we do this round with you, and, you know, ask the lead investor here to, you know, join in a future round or something like that. And so we end up sort of morphing what the round looked like too. And I think that happens pretty often. So you always have to do what's best for your business and what feels right. And that's what felt right and turned out to be the right decision.
I think the other important element that maybe hasn't been touched on here is that, like, I have 6 or 7 main investors, and having them, nurturing relationships between them is also an important thing to do. So part of what that can mean is, so, you know, if I have one investor who's very strong in understanding industrial implementation and another one who's really strong in understanding financing, getting them to have a relationship with one another is very helpful, because then it means that there can be credibility besides your own voice when you're trying, you know, so let's say it's industrial implementation, you're trying to explain why, you know, why you're seeing a slowdown in one area or an acceleration in another. Having someone, another voice around the table who understands some of that journey can just really help strengthen the teamwork across all of the investors.
also makes for better board meetings.
More productive.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But one thing that I think Melanie mentioned, or maybe it was Cora, about the number of investors. If you have a lot of investors, it's good to group them. Cora, I think you said that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
because if you end up with lots of these little investors, it's harder to manage the relationship. It's very time consuming, and it's also hard to keep this group cohesive. This one has this idea, that one has that idea. At some point, it becomes unmanageable. So, I would prefer or give preference to a group of angels rather than, angel, another angel, another angel, because you need to manage all of that.
So the takeaways there are good communication, and the relationship really is everything, and to spend time nurturing and taking care of that relationship.
And also, if you're unsure, ask advice from somebody who's done it. People are very happy to share, like an entrepreneur or an investor, or people are very happy to give advice, even if they don't invest. So you don't have to take all the advice they give. It's worth what you pay for it. But sometimes there are little pearls of wisdom they get that you missed.
What's the landscape like out there? Do you think there are is there a variety? Is there enough funding in additive manufacturing? Do you have a lot of choices, or do you find it's very like, it's a
I
set
think
group
it
of
depends
people?
when. If you're asking right now, the atmosphere is very difficult, I think, especially for financial investors, but also for, the large companies. They're publicly traded, they see their stock plummet. The focus is elsewhere. It's not on innovation, it's on shoring up what you've got, both for the VCs with their portfolio and for the companies with their business. Having said that, my anecdotal feel, and it's anecdotal, is that the strategic investors are investing more. They're investing less than before, but more than the financial ones. The financial ones are still in like, oh my God, what's going on?
Right.
I think the other area where funding is very ripe right now for 3D printing additive manufacturing is government funding. You've had the government initiatives coming out under President Biden, and there is just a lot of funding available right now through government contracts and grants and that type of thing. So I think that is a great source of funding if they align with your strategy. And a lot of the funding revolves around, reshoring initiatives, made in America type initiatives, and those are all great for 3D printing.
Yeah. I would just add that you want to pay attention to stories that say who has the money. So right now there's a lot of stories saying the VCs don't have the money. As I've followed it a little bit, it's that the smaller VCs who get backed by the larger VCs are not getting the larger VC money. So larger VCs are, really making sure that the money is going to their existing companies as well as their own seed selections. Corporates have had record profits through the last year, so corporates are a good place to go. Family funds, you want to pay attention to where the family funds are getting their money. Some took a very, very, very strong hit with crypto. But family funds who are investing in sustainability, I think there's some very strong stories about sustainability for 3D printing, and that's an important place to capitalize.
How important do you think it is to have co-founders during the fundraising process? Does that help? Does it matter? What are your thoughts on that?
I think so. I think that, first of all, it makes it easier for the investors to get it, because it's very rare. Sometimes it happens. I know somebody like that who's a single founder, founded an amazing company, doing great, all that wonderful, but that's very rare. Normally, if you're a single founder, they'll try to, at the seed stage, suggest co-founders to you, and you're better off bringing in your own co-founders than having them foisted on you, so to speak.
I'm picking up on some of the questions here just from the chat. What's the role of an investment broker? When are they useful?
So I did the prior funding on my own. And now with this larger round, we are using an investment banker. And the role that I see them in is, first of all, they have their own network, and they may know of funding sources that you may not, from going to conferences and meeting people and doing your networking or joining a local business accelerator. So they have a different network of people that they can go to. And in my case, I found it most valuable because they have been through this process typically many, many times, and they can sort of help weed out what might be a good deal, what might not be a good deal, and sort of sanity check, what you're thinking as an entrepreneur in terms of, valuation and the structure of the deal. And at least the investment banker that we work with right now has had some really great creative ideas to make things not only better for us, but also a better deal for the investor that I hadn't necessarily thought of on my own. I'm an engineering, have an engineering background, so I didn't even learn about fundraising until, just a few years ago. So it's been beneficial to us. It's been what will be beneficial to our future investors. And I think it's been a great idea. Now, if you're doing, a seed round and you feel like you're well connected in your industry and you've been through, accelerator, or you have a mentor that has helped you with your pitch deck, maybe it's not necessary. So I think it's one of the things you have to weigh, what you're going to get out of the investment banker. But I would say just as particular as you need to be with selecting the right investor or investment group for you is to find the right investment banker. And it's just like the investors, there's all different types. You can go to, large firms, you can go to boutique firms, you can do someone in your industry, you can do someone that's adjacent to your industry if you're trying to bring in someone to fund your company that isn't in your core market for some of the other reasons that we talked about, like being restricted to sell and that kind of thing. So it's, again, join an accelerator, find a good business mentor that can help you make that decision if an investment banker is the right choice for you.
I think there's a lot of scams to be wary of in terms of investment advisors, especially from overseas. So it's an important thing to know that only someone who is a certified investment banker can take a percentage from the round when you do a raise amount, at least in the United States. You can sometimes find investment advisors, especially from overseas, who will offer like, hey, I can do some introductions and I'll take a percentage. It's actually, you have to make sure you have your lawyer vet that. And sometimes they're not, if you're public about the fact that you're raising money, you can get a lot of unsolicited investment advisors that you really need to vet well, or else you can jeopardize your round. They can do
a good lawyer.
Yeah.
Because those contracts as well have a lot of very subtle things that crop up if things go bad or whatever.
So, and just a comment on the lawyers, just since we've touched on it, just to manage expectations. If you're doing a seed round, raising less than, maybe a few $1,000,000 or something like that, a lawyer who's skilled in doing investment rounds should be able to tell you, look, seed round using NVCA forms, I will charge you, it should be something in the range of $10,000 to $15,000. And you should be able to get a flat rate for that. It's very important, worth it might sound like a big bill, absolutely essential. And usually they'll ask for maybe something up front and then they get paid when the deal closes. And then the fees go up from there depending on the complexity of the round. And with every round, it gets more complex legally, and there's more and more pages of legal documents. So do not underestimate the role of a lawyer. They're absolutely essential.
Even if you are starting from the NVCA, which is a US thing and very useful in the US, if you have a European investor, it's even more complex because there isn't a kind of standard that people gravitate to. So every fund has their own documents with their own, and same for the banker.
Mm-hmm.
when we were starting with our Series A, we were luckily connected to one of the business accelerators that we had been a part of early on. So we were able to actually get some of that through the accelerator. So usually if you join an accelerator or some program like that, there'll be sort of a list of what you get if you join. And that was one of them for us, is a certain level of help through our first fundraising round. And that was very useful because it was very, very little upfront, since we had some of that covered through our partnership, and the rest we paid when we got the round. And so it didn't really affect our ability to operate or anything like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you all to just get a little introspective with this next question. What do you think was the most significant thing you learned, either about yourself or about the experience in your fundraising journey?
I find fundraising and building a company to be an extremely humbling experience. You know, you get a lot of advice. There's, you know, my son was even thinking about starting a business, and one of the pieces of advice I told him is that I said, you're going to find a lot of people who think your idea is a bad one. Your job is to find the ones who think it's a good idea. And that goes no matter how complex your business is that you're finding people who think you have a good idea, who agree with you about your thesis, and they're going to get in the boat and help you row. And but that is a humbling experience, you know, because you have to accept when your idea needs to be changed. You have to accept when, you know, maybe you don't have the best team around you and you need to make improvements. You have to always be, you know, you get a million pieces of advice. You have to be humble and sift through that advice and figure out which parts of it are good and should be followed, without letting your ego get in the way. And so I think it's, you know, it is a challenge. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do, is building a business.
But also the most rewarding, probably.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
Melanie,
so it's,
sorry.
yeah, I was just going to add that the other thing is that with fundraising is to recognize you're in an all or nothing game. Your investors are trying to get a certain multiplication or something like that, but as a founder, you're in all or nothing. So so you really need to be thinking about your fundraise from the perspective of, it's more important to have money than not. If you have no money, then you're done. So you're playing an all or nothing game, and you need to keep that in mind when you're negotiating. It's not all about valuation every step of the way. It's about where you're trying to get to and what do you need to get there.
Yeah. I think I found the fundraising process, fascinating, and I actually liked it a lot more than I thought that I would. Once I got used to, a lot of no's and a lot of different advice, many times that conflict with the advice that you had just heard the day prior. Once I sort of got through that, I realized this is actually pretty amazing. You have the opportunity to talk about your passion and talk about how you're going to change your world or your industry. And there's a wide audience that wants to hear about it, because they're looking for opportunities to invest in. So it's actually been a lot more fun than I thought it was, and very exciting.
Yeah, I think for me, because I was an investor first and an entrepreneur second, I was trying to maintain my detachment. And what I learned is that I thought I could do it, but I couldn't. And so your venture is like another baby. I could not maintain the detachment. It's very, very personal, even though it's business, and it's very all-consuming. There are no real vacations or breaks. It's always on your mind. You're always either working or thinking about. At least that's how it is for me. And I really thought that I could maintain a little bit of a detachment because of my history. I really couldn't. And about the fundraising specifically, I'm like Melanie. I really enjoyed it. I think it's an opportunity to even evangelize. And I think that you find a lot of people that you create new. Some of them I knew from before, but some of them are new relationships. And it's just a very fascinating and interesting journey. And if you're able to stomach the no's, which initially, what I said, it was very personal, it was a little bit harder, but you develop a mechanism to dealing with it, then even from the no's, almost from every meeting, you can learn something. And that was kind of the switch that I tried to do in order to protect my fragile heart.
Okay, we're gonna final question. It's gonna be your choice. You can provide a prediction for the fundraising in 2023, or a tip for people fundraising in 2023. So Lee, prediction or tip?
I'm afraid all the predictions will be the same, so I'll try for a tip.
Okay.
I have a feeling. So I think that in 2023, more than ever, you need to be creative with your funding sources, and you need to prioritize kind of in the reverse normal order. Normally, people want to get VCs, and if they can't get VCs, they want strategic, and if they can't, I think that I would start, as people said, with grants. And with collaborations, there's NRE, which is non-recurring expense that companies can pay for you to do it within a collaboration. And that's a very good source of money. Remembering what Cora said, that you get that money a little bit later because you get it against expenses, so not before the expenses. And then I would try for strategics. That would be my tip. And I think in 2023, the transparency is more important than ever.
Cora, what do you think? What do you think? Prediction or a tip for 2023?
I think a tip is that, one of the reasons why 3D printing is going to struggle this year is that the large public companies are not necessarily making their targets. And so the important tip in fundraising is really to make sure that your story can appeal to people who are investing outside of 3D printing. So you have a really compelling business that they're going to buy into otherwise, or you need to really show how you're going to be able to do something that other very well-funded businesses have not been able to do. So you really need to show within that context of sort of a negative investment environment for 3D printing, why you stand out.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good tip. Melanie, how about you? Would you like to make a prediction or give us a tip for fundraising in 2023?
I guess I'll go with a prediction. So
Okay.
shake it up a little bit. So, and I think, this is pretty well known, but, we see investments slowing down. We see valuations, lower, companies or VCs not willing to pay as high of a premium anymore for additive manufacturing. So, dare I say that previous 3D printing companies had maybe been slightly overvalued or, inflated valuations. And so I think the pendulum is sort of swinging, and I think it'll kind of level set where, valuations will be a little bit more back on earth and not so, inflated. And I think that's okay. I think as an entrepreneur, I'm very willing to accept that and take a more realistic approach to what your company is actually worth. But I really think that the companies that will succeed are not just the companies that have an awesome list of patents or a really cool technology, but it's going to be those companies that have the killer apps associated with them. So things that are going to make things different or enable things that aren't possible any other way. And that's who's going to succeed, because that's who's, that's when people are going to be willing to invest in a market that is not necessarily ideal from a financial perspective and say, yes, I want to buy into this. So killer apps are going to be it for 2023.
Can I take this one more step further? It's not just the app, it's the need. Start from the need, the pain. Why do we need that? It's very nice that we can make super complex geometries. That's not a need. But if you say, I want to cool an airplane and I can do it with a super complex geometry that I can't manufacture, so now I'm enabling a more efficient airplane engine, that's a need. That's a pain that has a dollar value on it.
Right. And that's a specific app, that's what I mean with killer apps. It has to be specific. It has to be, we're making this heat exchanger run 50% more efficient, which is going to have, impacts to how energy is produced and all this kind of thing. So it has to be a specific app.
I love it. Thank you all for joining, sharing your perspectives, your experience. I think we know that, women are not getting as much funding out there as men are, and what a serious game it is. So congratulations to all of you for being in it, and winning it, and looking forward to seeing the future of your companies grow. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
What an amazing panel. Thank you so much, Lindsay, for moderating. Everyone, now we're